I still remember the exact sound his tires made on the wet asphalt. Not a screech. Not a dramatic peel-out like you see in movies. Just a slow, quiet roll. The kind that said, I've already made up my mind and I don't need you to understand it. The red of his taillights blurred through the rain until they disappeared around the corner of West Addison Street. And then there was nothing. Just me. Just the rain. Just the weight of a 3-month-old baby pressed against my chest in a carrier I'd bought secondhand for $14 at a Goodwill in Wicker Park. Lily was asleep. Somehow, through all of it, she was asleep. I stood on that sidewalk for longer than I should have. Kept thinking he'd come back. That he'd turn the car around at the end of the block. Headlights swinging back toward me like an apology. I counted to 60. Then I counted again. The rain soaked through my jacket. The olive green one with the broken zipper I'd been meaning to fix for 2 months. And I remember thinking something completely absurd. I remember thinking, I should have fixed that zipper. That's what the mind does when it can't process the size of what just happened. It shrinks down to something manageable. The zipper. A practical problem with a practical solution. Because the actual problem, standing alone on a Chicago sidewalk at 11:40 at night with a sleeping infant, $214 in a bank account, and a husband who had just driven away from his own family, that problem had no zipper to fix. That problem had no size I could hold in my hands. I was 27 years old. I had followed this man to a city where I knew almost no one. I had given birth to his daughter in a hospital where I had to ask a nurse to hold my hand because there was no one else in the room. I had spent 3 months learning how to be a mother in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building with a broken heating unit and neighbors who fought every Friday night through the wall. And now I was standing in the rain. I didn't cry. Not that night. I think I was too cold to cry, or maybe too stunned, or maybe some quiet, ancient part of me had already known this was coming and had quietly, without telling the rest of me, already begun to prepare. I walked 4 blocks to a 24-hour laundromat on North Clark Street. I sat in a plastic chair under a flickering fluorescent light, unwrapped Lily from the carrier, held her against my dry inner shirt, and I made 3 phone calls. The third one, my cousin Renata in Dayton, Ohio, picked up on the second ring. "Elle," she said. Just that. Name. Half a name. "Can Lily and I come stay with you for a little while?" She didn't ask a single question. She just said, "I'll make up the couch." That was the night that made me. I didn't know it then. But everything I became, every shift I worked, every bill I paid alone, every school morning I got Lily out the door on 4 hours of sleep, it all started in that laundromat. Under that flickering light. In that city that was never really mine. My name is Elena Voss. Though for 11 years I went by Elena Carver, which was Marcus's last name, and which I dropped the same week I filed for divorce in 2009. Not out of bitterness, but because Voss was my father's name, and I had spent long enough carrying someone else's. I grew up in a small town called Pleasanton, Texas, about 40 miles southeast of San Antonio, which means it was the kind of place where everybody knew your grandmother, and the biggest Friday night event was a high school football game under stadium lights so bright they lit up the whole county. I was the second of 3 daughters. My father worked for a pipeline company. My mother taught 3rd grade for 22 years at the same elementary school I attended. We were not wealthy, but we were stable in the way that matters. There was always food, there was always structure, and there was always the expectation that you would figure things out. I was good at school. Specifically, I was good at math and at reading people, which are 2 skills that, it turns out, serve you very differently in life. The math I trusted. The people reading I overrode constantly because I was also, in my early 20s, the kind of woman who believed that love was a reason to ignore what she already knew. I met Marcus Carver when I was 24, at a mutual friend's birthday party in San Antonio. He was charming in the specific way that feels like confidence until much later when you realize it was closer to performance. He had plans. He always had plans. There was always a deal coming together, an opportunity on the horizon, a city where everything was about to open up. When I met him, the city was Chicago. His cousin had a connection to a distribution company up there. There was a management position. There was a future. I want to be honest about something. I was not naive. I had a full-time job as a bookkeeper for a small construction firm in San Antonio. I had my own apartment. had savings. I had a life that was quiet and mine. But I was also 24 years old and I had never lived anywhere but Texas. And Marcus made Chicago sound like the beginning of everything. So I went. I left my job. I left my apartment. I left my family. And I left. Though I didn't think of it in those terms at the time. I left Daniel. I'll come back to Daniel. He matters to this story more than I understood for a very long time. In Chicago, the distribution job Marcus was promised fell through within 60 days. He found other work. Inconsistent, contract-based, never quite enough. I found bookkeeping work at a restaurant supply company on the north side. And within a year I was doing the accounting for 3 of their subsidiary vendors. I was the one keeping us financially stable, but in the logic of our relationship, that somehow never translated into me having a say in how we lived or what we planned. By the time I found out I was pregnant with Lily, Marcus and I had been in Chicago for 2 years. And the relationship had calcified into something I kept telling myself was temporary difficulty rather than permanent character. Lily was born on February 3, 2004, at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, at 6:17 in the morning. 7 pounds 4 ounces. She had my eyes from the very first day. Dark brown, wide open, and looking at everything like she was already taking notes. I was back at work 11 weeks later because we needed the income. 3 weeks after that, Marcus drove away in the rain. And I need you to understand something about who I was in that moment. I was not a woman who fell apart. I was a woman who had been quietly, efficiently managing everything for 2 years while being treated like a passenger in her own life. The night Marcus left, I lost a husband. But I also, without fully realizing it, got my life back. Dayton, Ohio. Renata's couch became Renata's spare room, which became a studio apartment 3 blocks away, which became a 2-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a house on Salem Avenue that cost $620 a month, and had a landlord named Mr. Petrakis who fixed things the same week you asked, which felt, after Chicago, like an almost indecent luxury. I want to tell you this part clearly, not for sympathy, but because it matters to what comes later. The 20 years between that Chicago sidewalk and Lily's graduation are not a montage. They are not a sad song playing over a series of images. They were specific, textured, and often very hard, and I lived all of them on purpose. I got a job at a diner called Patsy's on Stanley Avenue within 2 weeks of arriving in Dayton. I was a waitress. I had a bookkeeping background and 2 years of vendor accounting experience, but Patsy's paid me $2.13 an hour plus tips, and they were willing to work around Lily's daycare schedule, and that mattered more than my resume. I worked the morning shift from 5:30 a.m. to 2 p.m., picked up Lily from Mrs. Adeyemi across the hall who watched her for $85 a week, a rate she quietly dropped to $60 when she noticed how carefully I counted my tips, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays I worked a second shift at a bar called Hutton's from 7 p.m. to midnight. I did that for 3 years. Then I added Saturdays at Hutton's. Then I got a small bookkeeping client, a dry cleaning business on Brown Street, that paid me $300 a month to reconcile their accounts on Sunday mornings while Lily watched cartoons on my laptop. I'm telling you about the money because money is how I kept score. Not out of greed. Out of necessity. When you are completely alone and completely responsible for another human being, you count everything. You know exactly what a gallon of milk costs at 3 different stores. You know the difference between a $4.80 lunch and a $3.20 lunch and what that $1.60 means at the end of the month. You know which months have 5 Fridays and why that matters for your tips. And you know with a very specific kind of quiet fury, exactly how much it costs to raise a child that someone else helped create and then simply walked away from. Marcus called once. Lily was 5 years old. It was a Tuesday evening in October, and I was doing homework with her at the kitchen table. She was learning to write the letter G, when my phone rang with an Atlanta area code I didn't recognize. Elena. His voice was exactly the same. That was the strangest part. I just wanted to check in. See if you and the baby were okay. Baby. Lily was 5. She had opinions about pasta shapes and a best friend named Cora and a library card she treated like a precious document. She was not a baby. I said, "We're fine, Marcus." He said, "Good. That's good. I've been meaning to reach out." I said, "It's been 5 years." He said, "I know. I know that. I want you to know I think about you guys. I looked at Lily across the table, her tongue pressed between her teeth in concentration as she formed the curve of a G, and I felt something cold and clarifying move through me. Thinking about us, I said, doesn't pay for daycare. It would take 20 years to understand that completely. He didn't call again. Not when Lily started middle school. Not when I finally got my bookkeeping certification and left the diner after 11 years. Not when Lily made honor roll every semester of high school. Not when she got into Ohio State on a partial academic scholarship and I covered the rest with a combination of a Parent Plus loan, a Pell Grant, and 4 years of strategic overtime. The custody papers he was supposed to sign in 2005. He never signed them, which meant I could never file for child support through the courts the normal way without tracking him down and serving him. And I didn't have the money for an attorney, and I didn't have the time, and I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to chase a man who had made it abundantly clear he did not want to be caught. So I carried it. Every school supply list. Every field trip permission slip. Every pediatric copay. $25 a visit 4 times a year for 18 years. Every pair of shoes that Lily outgrew before she'd worn them more than twice. Every birthday cake I made from scratch because the ones at the grocery store cost $32 and that was 2 hours of diner tips. Every school play I missed because I couldn't find coverage for my shift, and the way Lily, at age 8, told me it was fine in the specific tone children use when they have already learned not to ask for too much. That last one I carried the heaviest. But I want to be very clear about something. I did not spend 20 years in bitterness. Bitterness is expensive. It costs you energy you cannot afford when you are working 2 jobs and raising a daughter and trying to remember what it felt like to want something for yourself. I didn't hate Marcus. I barely thought about Marcus. What I thought about was Lily's next tuition installment. Her winter coat. Her college application essays that she read to me out loud at the kitchen table while I reviewed the restaurant group's monthly accounts on my laptop. That was my life. It was small in some ways and enormous in others. And it was entirely, defiantly mine. What I didn't know, what I had no reason to know, was that in a filing cabinet in a Cook County courthouse, there was a document with my name on it. Judgment. Number. A debt that the state of Illinois had never stopped considering collectible. But that comes later. First there was a graduation. There was a rainstorm. And there was a man I had not seen in 29 years, standing beside me with an umbrella, saying my name like it was something he had been holding carefully in his mouth for a very long time. That was the moment everything shifted. Columbus, Ohio. May 11, 2024. The ceremony was held on the main oval of Ohio State's campus, which is one of those wide, flat stretches of grass that looks magnificent in photographs and deeply impractical in a Midwestern spring. The forecast that morning had said 30% chance of rain, which in Columbus means you bring an umbrella and also mentally prepare for a full thunderstorm. I did not bring an umbrella. I had driven up from Dayton the night before, stayed in a Hampton Inn off Route 315 for $94, and spent approximately 45 minutes that morning trying to decide what to wear to the kind of event that felt enormous to me and routine to everyone else there. I settled on a navy blue dress I'd bought 2 years prior for a work dinner, low block heels, and a small gold necklace that had belonged to my mother. I looked, I think, like a woman who was trying to look like she wasn't trying. Which is to say I looked fine. Lily had asked me twice if I was bringing anyone. Friend, a date, anyone. And twice I had told her no, I was fine coming alone, and she had given me the look she'd been giving me since she was about 14. The one that said, "Mom, I see you, and I wish you'd let someone else see you too." I always changed the subject. The ceremony started at 10. By 10:40, the sky had gone the color of old pewter, and by 11, the rain had begun. Not dramatic at first, just that fine, persistent mist that soaks you slowly enough that you don't realize how wet you are until it's too late. Most people around me had umbrellas snapping open in a wave across the crowd. I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and told myself it was fine. And then a large, dark umbrella appeared above my head. Not offered. Not held out toward me with a question. Just quietly, simply extended to cover both of us, held by a hand I hadn't looked at yet. I turned, prepared to thank a stranger. He said my name before I could speak. Elena Voss. Not a question. The way you say a name when you've been turning it over in your mind for years and you finally have somewhere to put it. I looked at him fully then. He was tall. He had always been tall, with close-cropped gray at his temples and the kind of face that doesn't change so much as it deepens. Dark eyes. Steady expression. He was wearing a charcoal blazer over a white shirt, no tie, and he was holding that umbrella with the easy confidence of a man who had planned for rain. I said his name so quietly I'm not sure he heard it over the ceremony audio. Daniel. He smiled. And I want to try to describe that smile accurately because it matters. It was not the smile of someone who had rehearsed this moment or was pleased with himself for engineering it. It was the smile of someone who was simply, genuinely relieved. Like he'd been looking for something for a long time and had stopped expecting to find it, and then there it was, right in front of him in the rain at a college graduation in Columbus, Ohio. My niece Carmen is graduating today, he said. Mechanical engineering. My daughter Lily, I said. Business analytics. I know, he said. I saw her name in the program and I looked for you for 40 minutes. I didn't know what to do with that. So I looked back at the stage. We stood under that umbrella for the remaining hour and 20 minutes of the ceremony. We didn't talk much. There was something about the rain and the moment that made conversation feel unnecessary. Like we were both just quietly acknowledging that this was happening and neither of us needed to explain it yet. At one point his arm adjusted and the umbrella tilted slightly and 3 drops of rain hit my shoulder and he said, "Sorry," immediately, and I said, "It's fine," and somehow that small exchange felt more intimate than anything I'd experienced in years. After the ceremony, in the crowd of families and photographers and balloons, Daniel and I stood at the edge of the oval while Lily found us. She walked toward me in her cap and gown, holding her diploma folder, beaming. And then she saw Daniel standing next to me and she looked at him and then at me with an expression I can only describe as careful hope. I introduced them. Daniel shook her hand and said, "Your mother used to beat me at every math competition in Pleasanton, Texas. I want you to know that." Lily looked at me. "Mom, you never told me that. You never asked," I said. We had lunch, the 4 of us, Daniel, his niece Carmen, Lily, and me, at a restaurant near campus. Carmen was 22 and brilliant, and had already accepted a position at an aerospace firm in Houston. Daniel was 51, originally from San Antonio, currently living in Austin where he ran a mid-size civil engineering consulting firm he'd built over 17 years. He had never married. He said it plainly, without drama, the way you state a fact about yourself that you've made peace with. After lunch, walking to the parking lot, Daniel asked if he could call me. I said yes before I'd finished the thought. On the drive back to Dayton that evening, Lily called me from her own car, still giddy from the day. "Mom," she said. "Who is he?" "Someone I knew a long time ago," I said. "He looked at you like you were the only person at that entire graduation." I didn't answer that. I just watched the highway stretch out ahead of me in the early evening light, and I let myself feel something I hadn't felt in a very long time, something cautious and quiet and warm, like the first few degrees of a room beginning to heat. The last time I had seen Daniel Reyes I was 18 years old, and I had thought the whole world was still in front of me. It turned out it still was. Daniel and I talked every day for the first 2 weeks after Columbus. Not long calls at first. 20 minutes here. 30 there. He had a quiet way of asking questions that made me want to actually answer them, which was new. Most people who asked about my life were really just waiting for the part that confirmed what they already assumed, that I had struggled, that I had managed, that I was fine now. Daniel asked differently. He asked about specific things. He asked what Lily's laugh sounded like when she was little. He asked what my apartment looked like. He asked what I ordered at the restaurant supply company's work lunches back in Chicago, as though the texture of my ordinary days mattered to him. About 3 weeks in, I told him the full story. Marcus, Chicago, the rain, the laundromat, all of it. I had told pieces of this story to various people over the years. Renata, a therapist I saw for 4 months in 2011, one close friend from the restaurant group named Paulette. But I had never told the whole thing, start to finish, out loud to one person. Doing so was an odd experience. It was like taking something that had lived inside my body for 20 years and holding it up to the light. Examining the actual shape of it. What I noticed saying it all out loud was the money. Not in a bitter way. In a precise bookkeeper's way. I had been keeping financial records since Lily was born. Not as evidence, not with any legal strategy in mind, but simply because that was how I managed everything. I had ledgers. I had receipts. I had a shoebox under my bed. Later a plastic file box, then a proper accordion folder, containing 20 years of documented expenses related specifically to raising Lily. After the call with Daniel, I found myself sitting on my bedroom floor with that accordion folder open in my lap. I don't know exactly what I was looking for. Maybe I just needed to see it laid out. The $85 a week daycare that dropped to $60 out of kindness. Pediatric copays. The school supply list. The orthodontics. $3,400 for Lily's braces in 2016, which I paid in monthly installments over 2 years. The driving lessons. The SAT prep workbooks. The graduation dress I'd bought her for senior prom. The Ohio State application fees. The laptop she needed for college that I'd put on a credit card at 19.9% APR and paid off over 14 months. I had kept all of it. Every receipt. Every statement. Every ledger entry with a date and an amount and a category. 20 years of Lily's life. Documented in blue ink and printed bank statements. And at the very back of the accordion folder, held together with a rubber band that had gone brittle with age, was a small stack of documents I hadn't looked at since I'd filed them away sometime around 2019. Official correspondence. Cook County, Illinois. The return address on the envelope was from the office of the clerk of the circuit court. I had received this certified letter in March of 2019, and I had not opened it. I want to explain that without making myself sound foolish, because I don't think I was foolish. I think I was someone who had spent 15 years successfully insulating herself from anything to do with Marcus Carver, and an official envelope from a Chicago courthouse had felt, in 2019, like a door I didn't have the capacity to open. I had been in the middle of helping Lily apply to colleges. I was managing 3 bookkeeping clients alongside my restaurant group work. I had put the envelope in the back of the folder and told myself I would deal with it later. Later was apparently May 2024, sitting on my bedroom floor at 11 o'clock at night with Daniel's voice still in my ear. Opened it. It took me a moment to understand what I was reading, and then I read it again slowly to make sure. In 2018, the state of Illinois, through the Illinois Department of Healthcare and Family Services, had filed a civil enforcement action against Marcus Carver for unpaid child support. The state had accessed Lily's birth certificate, which listed Marcus as father, and cross-referenced it with my documented address history and tax filings. They had located Marcus in Georgia. They had calculated arrears. The judgment, entered in Cook County Circuit Court in February 2019, was for $47,200 in unpaid child support, plus statutory interest calculated from Lily's date of birth. With 5 years of accrued interest at the Illinois statutory rate of 9%, the collectible amount as of that letter was listed as approximately $61,400. I sat with that number for a long time. $61,400. 20 years of skipped meals and double shifts and $3.20 lunches, and somewhere in a filing system in Cook County, Illinois, a court had already done the math. What they didn't know was that I had never stopped keeping records. And what Marcus had no idea about was that I had finally, at 47 years old, found exactly the right person to help me understand what to do with them. I did not call Marcus. I want to be clear about that because I think it would have been tempting, for some people in some versions of this story, to pick up the phone and let him know what was coming. To have the confrontation. To finally say all the things that had accumulated over 2 decades of silence. I didn't want that. I had spent 20 years not giving Marcus Carver my emotional energy, and I saw no reason to start now. What I wanted was simpler and colder, and far more effective than a phone call. I wanted the money. The actual, documented, court-ordered money. Not as punishment. Not as revenge. As an accounting correction. A ledger that had been out of balance for 20 years. Finally reconciled, I called an attorney. Her name was Patricia Owens, and I found her through a referral from Paulette, whose sister had used her in a divorce case in Columbus. Patricia was a family law attorney with 23 years of experience, an office on North High Street, and the specific manner of a woman who has heard every version of every story and has no patience for either drama or delay. She was exactly what I needed. I emailed her the scanned Cook County judgment, the original certified letter, and a 12-page financial summary I had spent 3 evenings compiling, itemized by year, cross-referenced against Lily's documented expenses, with a total that I calculated conservatively at $74,000 in direct child-rearing costs over 20 years. Patricia called me the following Tuesday. "Ms. Voss," she said, "this judgment is still fully enforceable. The statute of limitations on child support judgments in Illinois does not run while the child is a minor, and in cases of willful non-payment it extends significantly beyond that. You have a collectible debt. How do we collect it?" Yes. We locate the debtor, identify attachable assets, and file for enforcement in the appropriate jurisdiction. Where is he now? Atlanta, Georgia. He manages a logistics company. Midsize from what I can tell. He has a LinkedIn profile. There was a brief pause. "Does he know you have this judgment?" "No," I said. "Good," she said. "Let's keep it that way for now." Over the next 8 weeks, Patricia and I built what she called the enforcement package. It was, from my perspective, a deeply satisfying exercise in paperwork. I had spent 20 years being good at paperwork. I had spent 20 years documenting everything. And now every receipt, every ledger, every copay and school supply and utility bill was being organized into a formal legal submission that would be filed with the Fulton County Superior Court in Atlanta, where Marcus Carver currently had assets and income. I told 2 people what I was doing. Daniel and Lily. Lily's reaction was complicated. She was 20 at this point, old enough to understand the legal mechanics and young enough that the emotional weight of it hit her differently than it hit me. She sat at my kitchen table and read through the judgment summary with the same focused expression she'd had at age 8 doing homework, and when she finished she looked up and said very quietly, "He owes you this." Not us. Me. I thought about correcting her. Then I didn't. Daniel's reaction was simpler. He listened to the whole update on a Sunday evening phone call, and when I finished he was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Do you need anything from me?" Said no. He said, "Okay. Then I'll just be here." That was the right answer. In week 4 of the process, Patricia's office sent an information request to Marcus's employer, a logistics management company called Ridgepoint Solutions, based in Atlanta, with approximately 180 employees and Marcus listed on their website as Regional Operations Director. The request was formal, filed through proper interstate enforcement channels, and asked for confirmation of employment and compensation structure. Ridgepoint's HR department responded within 10 business days. Confirmed employment. Confirmed salary range commensurate with the title. In week 6, the garnishment petition was filed. I did not tell Patricia what to say or how to proceed. She had been doing this for 23 years. I gave her the documents, answered her questions, paid her retainer of $2,800, which I had specifically set aside from a tax refund, almost like I had known on some level that this moment was coming, and I let her work. What I did in those 8 weeks was live my life. I went to work. I managed my clients. I talked to Daniel every evening. I had dinner with Lily twice. I went to a yoga class that Paulette had been inviting me to for 3 years. I slept, for the first time in longer than I could remember, without the low-level hum of financial anxiety that had been the background noise of my entire adult life. Because I knew something Marcus didn't know yet. I knew that in a courthouse in Fulton County, Georgia, a judge had reviewed a valid 20-year-old child support judgment from Cook County, Illinois, and had signed an order authorizing income withholding. I knew that Ridgepoint Solutions' payroll department had received official legal notice. I knew that beginning on the 1st of the following month, a portion of Marcus Carver's paycheck would be redirected. He would find out when he saw his pay stub. I did not need to be there for that moment. I did not need to see his face or hear his voice. I did not need the confrontation or the explanation or the apology, The apology that was 20 years overdue and would have been, by now, so inadequate as to be almost insulting. I just needed the math to be corrected. And it was about to be. That should have been the end of it. In a way it was. But what I didn't anticipate was that Marcus would call Patricia's office 3 days after his first garnished paycheck, and that what happened in that phone call would give me something I hadn't even known. I was still waiting for Marcus's attorney called Patricia on a Wednesday morning in September. Patricia relayed the call to me that same afternoon with the measured, unsurprised tone of someone who had seen this particular sequence of events many times before. The attorney, a man named Greg Holloway based in Buckhead, had indicated that his client was blindsided by the garnishment and wanted to discuss an amicable resolution. Patricia told me what that meant in plain language. Marcus wanted to settle, quietly, quickly, before the garnishment became a permanent fixture of his professional life, and before anyone at Ridgepoint Solutions started asking questions about what kind of man their regional operations director actually was. "What are our options?" he asked. "He can continue under the garnishment order until the full judgment plus interest is satisfied, which at the current withholding rate would take approximately 4 years, Patricia said. Or he can offer a lump sum settlement. Given the documentation you've provided and the enforceability of the original judgment, I would recommend we counter at the full accrued amount. As of this month, that figure with interest is $63,400. What do you think he'll do?" "I think," Patricia said with the faintest suggestion of satisfaction in her voice, "that a man in his position would rather write a check than have this conversation continue." She was right. The negotiation took 11 days. Greg Holloway opened at $38,000. Patricia did not move from $63,400. On day 8, Holloway came back at $55,000. Patricia sent a single-line response. "Our figure remains $63,400. My client has 20 years of documented expenses and a valid court order. We are prepared to continue enforcement indefinitely." On day 11, Marcus Carver agreed to $52,000, payable in 2 installments, $30,000 within 15 days of the signed settlement agreement, and $22,000 30 days after that. I want to tell you how I felt when Patricia called with the final number, because I've thought about it many times since and I want to be accurate. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like pumping my fist or crying or calling someone to celebrate. What I felt was something much quieter and much more specific. I felt the particular relief of a ledger finally balancing, of a number that had been sitting in the wrong column for 20 years being moved, with the stroke of a pen, to where it always belonged. I signed the settlement agreement on a Friday afternoon, sitting at Patricia's office on North High Street, using a pen she handed me that had her firm's name printed on the side. I dated it. I initialed the payment schedule. I shook Patricia's hand and thanked her, and she said, "You did the hard part 20 years ago. I just filed the paperwork." The first installment, $30,000, arrived in my account on a Tuesday 14 days later. I was at my kitchen table when the bank notification came through on my phone. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I put the phone face down on the table and finished my coffee. The second installment came exactly on schedule, 30 days later. $22,000. Total received $52,000. I called Lily that evening. She drove over from her apartment. She had moved to Columbus after graduation, working at a data analytics firm downtown, and she sat across from me at the kitchen table where she had done homework for 12 years and read the settlement summary I had printed out for her. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Mom, this is more than you spent on my braces and my laptop and 3 years of school supplies combined." "It's less than I spent total," I said. "But it's something." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine and didn't say anything else for a while. We ordered Thai food, the good place on Fifth Avenue that she loves, and we ate at the table and talked about her job and Daniel and whether I was finally going to take a real vacation, which Lily had been lobbying for with increasing intensity for about 6 months. Daniel was in Columbus that weekend. He had been coming up from Austin roughly once a month, and I had been to Austin twice, and we were doing the careful, deliberate work of building something real rather than rushing toward something that only felt real. He brought coffee Saturday morning and sat at my kitchen table, and I told him the settlement was complete. He nodded. He didn't say I told you so or you deserved this or any of the things people say when they want credit for your victory. He just said, "How do you feel?" I thought about that for a moment. Like I put something down, I said. Something I didn't even realize I was still carrying. He reached over and refilled my coffee without being asked. And that small, quiet gesture made me feel more seen than most grand declarations I've encountered in my life. I want to tell you what I did with the money because I think it matters. $18,000 went into a high-yield savings account I opened specifically for that purpose. That is my emergency fund, the one I have been trying to build for 20 years and kept having to drain every time a car repair or a medical bill or a tuition shortfall arrived. It exists now. It is fully funded. It sits there with the reliable stillness of something that was always supposed to be there. $12,000 I put toward the remaining balance of my Parent Plus loan from Lily's Ohio State tuition. The balance is now under $4,000 and will be paid off by March. $14,000 I transferred to Lily directly, not as a gift she needed to explain or justify, but as a simple transfer with a memo line that said, "For you." From the beginning. She called me crying. I told her to stop. She didn't stop. The remaining $8,000 I used to take that vacation Lily had been asking about. Daniel and I went to Portugal for 10 days in October, Lisbon and the Alentejo region, where the light in the afternoons comes in low and golden over the cork oak trees and everything feels ancient and unhurried. I sat in a small cafe in Evora on the third day, drinking the best coffee I have ever had in my life, watching the light on the white walls of the buildings across the square, and I thought about that laundromat on North Clark Street in Chicago. The flickering fluorescent light. Plastic chair. 3 phone calls. I thought about 20 years of double shifts and $3.20 lunches and school play absences and carefully counted tips. And I thought, all of it led here. Not to the money, and not to Marcus finally being accountable, and not even to Daniel, though Daniel is the best part of the current chapter. All of it led to me, sitting in a square in Portugal, drinking good coffee, with nothing left to carry that I hadn't chosen to carry. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. If you've listened to this entire story, I want to say something to you directly. Not about Marcus. I have nothing more to say about Marcus. I want to say something about the 20 years. There is a version of this story where I am defined by what Marcus did on that sidewalk. Where the rain and the laundromat and the $214 and the broken zipper are the center of the story, and everything else is just survival orbiting that wound. I refuse that version. The center of my story is Lily at her kitchen table at age 8, pressing her tongue between her teeth to get the curve of a G exactly right. The center is Mrs. Adeyemi quietly dropping my rate to $60 without being asked. The center is Renata saying I'll make up the couch without a single question. The center is 20 years of showing up, imperfectly and exhaustedly and completely, for a person who needed me. The $52,000 was not justice. Justice would have been a different life. The $52,000 was an acknowledgement, impersonal, procedural and 20 years late, that the work was real and the cost was real and the math was real. It was enough. If you are somewhere in the middle of carrying something that someone else should have shared with you, if you are the one who stayed, the one who counted every dollar, the one who showed up for every school morning on 4 hours of sleep, I want you to know that the ledger is not permanently unbalanced even when it feels that way. Sometimes the correction comes from a courthouse. Sometimes it comes from a stranger with an umbrella. Sometimes it comes from finally sitting down on your bedroom floor and opening the envelope you weren't ready to open in 2019. The rain does stop. Not always on schedule. Not always in the way you imagined. But it stops. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city in the comments because this community comes from everywhere and I find that genuinely remarkable. And if there's a document you've been afraid to open, a call you've been putting off, a boundary you've been meaning to set, maybe today is the day. That was only the truth about who they were. I'll see you in the next one.